Hello, law students and legal practitioners. Today, we will analyze the case of Leo Winston Bryn Lee versus spouses Amadeo and Adelaida Carreon. GR number 149023. Decided by the Supreme Court on September 27, 2007. Let's begin. Doctrine of the case. An easement of right-of-way may be demanded by the owner of an immovable that is completely surrounded by other properties and has no adequate outlet to a public highway, provided that all the requisites under Articles 649 and 650 of the Civil Code are present. For a compulsory right-of-way to be granted, the law requires that the dominant estate be surrounded by other immovables and has no adequate access to a public highway, that proper indemnity is paid to the servient estate, that the isolation is not due to the acts of the dominant estate owner, and that the easement is established at the point least prejudicial to the servient estate and, insofar as practicable, at the shortest distance to the public highway. The existence of informal or permissive access routes does not bar the grant of a legal easement. The law requires an adequate and legally demandable outlet, not merely temporary, informal, or proposed pathways. The determination of whether an outlet is adequate is a mixed question of fact and law and depends on the circumstances of the case, including accessibility, permanence, and sufficiency for the needs of the dominant estate. To easily understand the resolution of the issue, here are the relevant facts of this case. Spouses Amadeo and Adelaida Carreon were the owners of a residential house and lots numbers 8B and 8C located in Cebu City and covered by transfer certificates of title. Their properties were situated within a block of lots and had no direct access to a public road. Adjacent to the Carreon property were several lots owned by different individuals. One of these owners was Anita Linda Rodriguez, who owned lot number 6213A2. Due to the lack of direct access to a public highway, the Carreons initially filed a complaint for easement of right-of-way against Rodriguez before the Regional Trial Court of Cebu City. During pre-trial, the RTC determined that an alternative servient estate existed on the eastern side of the Carreon property, owned by spouses Anselmo Jardin, consisting of lots numbers 6213A3, 6213A4, and 8A. Consequently, the Carreons amended their complaint to include the Jardin spouses as additional defendants. While the case was pending, the Jardin spouses sold their lots to Leo Winston Bryn Lee, the petitioner. Because of this development, the Carreons sought leave to file a second amended complaint to implead Lee as an additional defendant, which was granted by the trial court. After a full trial, the RTC ruled in favor of the Carreons and ordered Lee to grant a 1-meter wide and 13-meter long right-of-way over the northern portion of his property. The trial court also ordered the demolition of a fence obstructing the pathway and required the Carreons to pay indemnity for the value of the land occupied and the fence to be demolished. Lee appealed to the Court of Appeals, arguing that the Carreons already had an outlet to the nearest road and that the grant of an easement was unnecessary. The Court of Appeals affirmed the RTC decision in full, prompting Lee to elevate the case to the Supreme Court via a petition for review on certiorari. The main issue resolved by the Supreme Court in this case is whether or not the respondents, spouses Carreon, are entitled to an easement of right-of-way over the petitioner's property. Yes, the respondents are entitled to an easement of right-of-way over the petitioner's property. The Supreme Court anchored its ruling on Articles 649 and 650 of the Civil Code, which govern legal easements of right-of-way. These provisions allow the owner of an immovable surrounded by other properties, without an adequate outlet to a public highway, to demand a right-of-way upon payment of proper indemnity, provided the isolation is not due to the owner's own acts and the easement is established at the least prejudicial point to the servient estate. The court reiterated that all four requisites for a legal easement must concur and emphasized that the law requires an adequate outlet, not a mere makeshift or permissive pathway. Applying the law to the facts, the Supreme Court held that all requisites for a compulsory easement were present. First, the Carreon property was completely surrounded by other immovables, including that of Lee, and lacked an adequate outlet to a public highway. While the petitioner argued that the Carreons could traverse other lots informally, such access was neither permanent nor legally demandable and therefore did not satisfy the legal requirement of adequacy. Second, the respondents consistently expressed their willingness to pay proper indemnity, and the trial court in fact fixed the amount payable for both the portion of land affected and the fence to be demolished. This satisfied the second statutory requirement. Third, there was no evidence showing that the isolation of the Carreon property was due to their own acts. The lack of access resulted from the natural configuration of surrounding properties. Finally, the right-of-way granted was only 1 meter wide and affected a minimal portion of Lee's 249 square meter property. The location chosen was the least prejudicial to the servient estate and reasonably proximate to the nearest public road, fully complying with Article 650. For these reasons, the Supreme Court found no reversible error on the part of the Court of Appeals and affirmed the grant of an easement of right-of-way in favor of the respondents. Thank you for listening and happy learning. See you again for our next case discussions.